I want to welcome you all to this special Climate Week event, the Yale Environmental Dialogue. We're honored to have all of you here to join us for this conversation on climate change. This event represents the second of what we expect will be a long series of conversations hosted by the Yale Environmental Dialogue, an ambitious initiative we launched at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies to bring new energy into the national conversation about environmental issues. There are others in the months ahead, one coming up quite soon in Washington, D.C. During these events, we'll be bringing together some of the world's most respected environmental leaders across a range of disciplines, sectors, and political perspectives. And we're going to ask them to lead some difficult conversations. So why now and why difficult? Why now? We're here today following a century and a half of humanity exponentially increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in our atmosphere. Over 100 years of scientists predicting climate change, a half a century of planetary warming, 4 of the 5 most recent years being the hottest years in history, a summer of the hottest July ever on record for the planet, including heat waves that killed thousands of people in Europe, and the lowest Arctic and Antarctic sea ice in history. We're here following news today of 3 billion fewer birds today than several decades ago. We're here today following a few days of climate action instigated by the generation that inherits the consequences of our behavior. There are incredible environmental challenges that are happening right now. And while we're the species that's responsible for all these environmental challenges, we're also the species that has the intellect, the innovation, and we hope the political will to make a difference for the future, to protect the planet for ourselves and other species. Why difficult conversations? We know we're living at a time, especially here in the United States, where political division and deep differences over core principles have stalled the most urgent conversations about forward motion on the environment. It doesn't need to be this way. If we're going to address these challenges in a meaningful way, we need to engage across partisan boundaries, across different disciplines, to do the hard work of bridging these divides. Tonight's events, of course, also serves as a preview for a new book produced by the Yale Environmental Dialogue, A Better Planet, 40 Big Ideas for a Sustainable Future, which each of you have a copy of. My notes say that this will be published next month. On October 22nd, you've got an early release copy here. The book features dozens of leading experts, including many of the people in the room tonight, including 6 people on the stage, sharing their big ideas for a sustainable future. We're really proud of the book, and we hope you take the time to read it, but it's only part of what we're trying to achieve through this initiative. We want to promote conversation about many of these ideas, whether it's how to promote sustainable business practices, what a reimagined environmental policy nationally and internationally would look like, how we innovate to create a low-carbon emissions future, or how we stop the rate of biodiversity loss. We know the challenges are daunting, but we also think that as a society we can do this with our innovation and our will to engage. I want to thank everyone who contributed to the book. We had many faculty at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, faculty from other areas of Yale, scholars from across the country and the world who shared their time and their ideas. And I'd also like to thank the staff at our school and the Yale University Press who made this possible. There were a lot of people who worked hard. We think that Yale is and can be even more of a leader in addressing critical and existential challenges of our day in the environment. But we really do intend for this to be a dialogue, and this is structured to be a dialogue tonight and going forward. Tackling this challenge is going to require a lot of smart people from different corners of our society working together, and I'm really pleased that you want to be part of that conversation tonight. So without further ado, I want to introduce the leader of the Yale Environmental Dialogue, author, editor, and our facilitator tonight, Professor Dan Esty. Dan is the Hillhouse Professor at Yale University with appointments in the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, the Yale Law School, and at the Yale School of Management. He also serves as the director of the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy and on the advisory board of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Professor Esty is the author or editor of 10 books, including the prize-winning Guide to Corporate Sustainability, Green to Gold, and dozens of articles on environmental and energy policy and their connection to regulatory policy, corporate strategy, sustainability, sustainability performance measurement, competitiveness, trade, and economic success. From 1989 to 1993, Professor Esty served in a number of senior positions in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington. During this time, he led EPA's regulatory review process and helped to negotiate the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change. From 2011 to 2014, he returned to government service as Connecticut's Commissioner of the Department of Environmental and Energy Protection. Known for his innovative work at the Business Sustainability Interface, Professor Esty has also provided strategy advice to companies, governments, international organizations, NGOs, and foundations around the world. He's really spearheaded this effort for the Yale Environmental Dialogue, so let's welcome him to the podium.
Thanks so much. Indy, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to have a crowd to talk to and to launch this conversation that, as our dean has just suggested, we intend to carry forward over coming months and years as we think about the pathway to a sustainable future, the subtitle of our book that is on sneak preview here today. And we recognize that this is an issue, the sustainability of the planet, that has touched a lot of people. The energy around this agenda, particularly with regard to climate change, is palpable. And the fact that we have such a turnout tonight tells me that people are interested not just in the political battle, but in the substance beneath it. And that's what we think we're contributing to. So we are gathered at the launch of Climate Week 2019. It's an annual gathering, as many of you will know, here at the same moment that the UN General Assembly is kicking off. It's a chance for those who care about the climate change agenda to compare notes, to carry forward conversations, to launch ideas, and we're very pleased to be part of that. We are gathered, as the dean has already indicated, at an auspicious moment. The Amazonian rainforest is burning. Political leaders in critical countries across the globe are struggling. And frankly, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us that no matter how hard that political agreement that we came to in 2015, now called the Paris Agreement, might have been, it's not enough, at least not enough scientifically. So we face a challenge going forward of how we raise the ambition, move ourselves towards an even more aggressive response to climate change, and we hope that the ideas in this book may be part of that process. But I want to start today and frame our conversation today by stepping back 30 years. 30 years ago, as you just heard, I was at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and was working with an incredible team there. A number of you are in this audience today. Derry Allen, who was with me in the policy office, Sue Biniaz, who was the lawyer leading the charge on our climate negotiations, and Bill Riley, our Yale graduate, who was my boss at the EPA. And we were, along with then Senator Kerry, later to become Secretary Kerry, thinking hard about how to advance this agenda. And I remember being taken aside in the spring of 1992 as we were moving towards the Rio Earth Summit, June of 1992, at which a climate change treaty was to be presented, and being pulled aside by the Secretary General of that Rio Earth Summit, a very well-known, highly regarded Canadian businessman and diplomat named Maurice Strong. And he took me aside and said, Dan, you've got a big job to do. The U.S. is critical, But remember, there are only going to be two possible outcomes in this kind of event where we bring together 100+ presidents and prime ministers, thousands of additional government officials, many thousands of media representatives, and then an endless number of non-governmental organization officials. With all that crowd assembled, two options are success and real success. And sadly, the intervening decades suggested that we had much more success than real success. Greenhouse gas emissions continued to rise. They did not come down. And that's the challenge to all of us today. How do we convert a success, which the Paris Agreement of 2015 really represents? Secretary Kerry leading the charge, Subin Es right there with him. President Obama pushing hard from a leadership posture that the U.S. has not always held, but did at that moment really reflect. How do we convert that into the watershed moment where the world community does raise the trajectory of response? And as I've said, I think it's going to require solutions. It's going to require a focus on action. It's going to really require a transformation of that political commitment into real change across the society in many respects, and certainly the energy foundations of the society. We do think the book that you have in front of you offers some frameworks, some concepts, some analytic tools, some technology suggestions that can be part of that process. We're very pleased to have a number of the authors of the 40 big ideas here in the audience, 5 of whom are on the stage, but a dozen more are in the audience, and we hope at the reception that follows you'll have a chance to catch up with them as well. Our program is going to be this. Each of our panelists will speak for just a few minutes to introduce their big idea. There will be a little moment of conversation across the panel as they talk to each other about these ideas. And then we're going to come to you to really make this a dialogue and a give and take. We've got students prepared to run mics to you, so if you want to talk, please raise your hand when we get to that moment, and we'll get you a microphone. But before we go further, I would like to invite Secretary Kerry to offer us a thought, an opening comment as we dig into this discussion. Secretary Kerry.
Dan, thank you enormously for allowing me. I'm crashing this party, folks. And I openly admit it to you, unabashedly. And I'm very honored that Dan and his team saw fit not to kick me out and allowed me actually to stand up here and say a few words. I'm also delighted to be here with Subin Es, for whom we all worked in the State Department. She's extraordinary. Yale is very lucky to have her. And we're also lucky to have all of you here tonight. Look, let me just cut right to the chase. I have been involved in this issue for longer than I like to think. It goes back to 1970 Earth Day, where we did have real success. And we kicked 7 of 12 terrible congressmen out of the Congress, and we passed the Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water, Marine Mammal Protection, Coastal Zone Management, and we created the Environmental Protection Agency of our country. We had political accountability. We created it. As I stand here tonight, I regret to say to all of you, having been to most of the conferences of the parties, having actually witnessed a failure that was camouflaged as a victory in Copenhagen right before I became Secretary of State, I know this journey, and so does Sue, and so do all of you. No country in the world is getting the job done. Despite all the warnings, despite everything that's coming at us, despite the science, despite all of the facts, despite everything we've seen, we're not doing it. And I find it incomprehensible that as a society we are prepared to allow 16-year-olds and teenagers and kids have to go straight from school because the adults are not willing to do what's necessary, not even in the remotest serious way. Now, yes, good things are happening. A lot of solar panels, a lot of solar prices come down, wind prices come down. We're competitive in certain technologies. We're moving. Businesses are moving. Tomorrow I will have a chance to address at the climate group the We Mean Business and Paul Pullman and Nigel Topping and a bunch of people who are serious, 1,000 companies that have joined with $21 trillion of capital. But guess what, folks? We got a president of the United States who's coming here tomorrow who is going to skip the climate meeting at the United Nations. We have a President of the United States who believes that it's okay to tell the world that climate change is a Chinese hoax. We have 130 plus members of the United States Congress who are deniers of the existence of a problem. And I got news for you. When that happens, you can't get done what we have to get done. There are fabulous ideas in this. And I'm proud that Yale is taking a lead and going to be putting these ideas on the table. But if you want these ideas to see the light of day and to begin to be implemented at the rate that we have to do this in order to win this battle, we have to change political accountability in the country. We have to change the entire dynamic. Not one country in the world living sustainably. 200 species a day being lost forever. So I'll wind up just by saying to you, I am wound up enough about this that I just came back from Aspen, where we had the weekend with a bunch of high mucky mucks in the country. A lot of private aircraft on that runway, I will tell you. But everybody is geared up and energized to try to get something done. So Ernie Moniz, who was our Secretary of Energy, and I, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, former Governor of California, and Christy Todd Whitman, former EPA and Governor of New Jersey, we are going to be joining together. And I announced today preliminarily on Face the Nation that we're going to be creating this. I'm going to do Morning Joe tomorrow. We're starting the rollout. We're going to formally have the website up, but we are starting something called World War Zero. World, because if the world doesn't do this, it ain't happening. War, because unfortunately the deniers, the delayers, the distorters have declared war on humanity, with people dying in floods and mudslides and fires, and you know the story. But here's the deal, folks, and every single one of you is critical to this. In 2016, when President Trump was elected in this country, the turnout was 55.6% of eligible voters. When I ran in 2004, it was 61.2%, and when Obama got elected in 2008, it was 63.7%. Do you get the drift? The majority of Americans believe we need to do something. But you know what happened in 2016? Only 19% of young people, 18 to 24, saw fit to come out and vote. And in 2018, when we took back the House, it went up to 31%, but that still means that 69% are not voting. So World War Zero is a nonpartisan, we're going to gear up. Hank Paulson is a supporter of it, Chuck Hagel, former senator, Republicans, Democrats alike going to come together, and we're going to have the top roots try to marry the grassroots and provide the political cover that changes the dynamic. We'll have Nobel laureates, we'll have scientists, hopefully university presidents, people from every walk of life, farmers who've been affected in South Dakota and in Oklahoma, Nebraska, all coming to the table to try and change the political dynamic of the country in order to make this issue a voting issue. I believe we can do it, but every one of you has a great idea, has an obligation to help us create the political dynamic where we can implement it. This will take a President of the United States who is prepared to call all the auto dealers into the White House, bring all the utility folks to the White House, bring all the public construction people to the White House, sit down and tell them we have to move to a completely electric vehicle fleet in the United States of America as rapidly as possible. We have to build the infrastructure to do that. We have to have the power production decarbonized. And we have to do all of this, unfortunately, because of what the scientists are telling us and because of our inability to have done this previously, we have to do this in a short span of time. So tonight, every one of these meetings, most important thing we can be doing in the United States of America, we have to restore America's leadership on this on a global basis. Remember, we knew in Paris, and I'll just close it, we knew in Paris that we were not going to be guaranteeing we hold the Earth's temperature rise to 2 degrees centigrade. We couldn't do that because we couldn't make it mandatory. If you did, too many candidates are running around saying we're going to return to Paris. Folks, Paris, if you did everything we set out in Paris, we are still at 3.7 degrees. And the fact is that as I stand here tonight, we're actually heading towards 4 to 4.5 degrees, and scientists will tell you that is the difference between the difference between 2 degrees and 4 and 4.5 is a difference between civilization and not having it. Let's get the job done. Let's make sure we build on this week here in New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you for your leadership on climate change, more broadly on the sustainability of our country, and for service to our country more broadly. We're going to turn now to our panel, and let's dispense with biographies. They're in your program. We've got 5 fabulous perspectives on how we move towards a sustainable future. All 5 of our panelists are also focused on climate change, and we'll begin with Subin Es.
Hello, can you hear me?
You're on.
Okay, great. So my chapter is called Paris Can't Do It Alone. And my idea is a procedural one, but it's also about substance. My premise is that the Paris Agreement is very different from other international environmental agreements, and therefore requires a lot more support from other international agreements and institutions. So my idea is I'm calling for a SWAT team to do an inventory of what other agreements and international institutions have done, could do, should do, to better align themselves with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So why is the Paris Agreement different from other agreements? Well, most agreements are self-contained. The commitments are in there. If the countries go home and do what's in there, maybe with a little extra money, they get the job done. But Paris is not like that. 30 seconds on what the Paris Agreement does. It has a goal of limiting the temperature increase in the world. Each party designs its own commitment. The parties update those commitments every 5 years, and they, in theory, are supposed to encourage, the agreement encourages an increase in ambition each time they update their commitments. And then Paris has 2 other goals: to increase the resilience of the world and to make financial flows around the world compatible with its temperature goals. So why does it need help? I'm going to give you quick 7 reasons. 1, the goals are incredibly ambitious, and they implicate entire economies, and that distinguishes Paris from every other agreement. 2, the commitments are not preset. Countries actually have to set them every 5 years, and it's going to require all kinds of cajoling of countries to get them to set those targets, and we see that. That's one of the purposes of the Secretary General's summit this week. The 3rd is that many parties are going to need financial assistance to implement their commitments, and more broadly, the world's financial institutions, including the World Bank, regional development banks, and the private sector, are going to have to make changes to align themselves with a Paris-compatible world. The 4th is that other international agreements might even impede the ability of parties to implement their Paris targets. If Paris works properly and countries make their targets more ambitious over time, you could easily imagine challenges in the WTO or under investment agreements to the commitments that they've undertaken under Paris. The 5th is that the Paris Agreement actually designates other regimes to implement certain issues. One is international aviation emission reductions, and the other is international maritime emission reductions. So those are by definition going to happen somewhere else. The 6th is that for certain issues, other forums actually make more sense. You're not going to negotiate an agreement on fossil fuel subsidy reform among 195 countries. You don't have the expertise, and it's not going to work with so many countries. And the 7th is that some issues are so cross-cutting that they just cry out for treatment across multiple international institutions. And that includes climate impacts on the ocean, carbon removals. If you do those at scale, you're going to implicate biodiversity and forests, and migration that results from climate impacts. So far there's been quite a mixed record. If you look at other international agreements and institutions, the Montreal Protocol has done a good job in the sense that they have regulated HFCs, which is the greenhouse gas. Others have a much worse record, particularly the economic agreements, including the WTO. So we need an inventory of what can be done so that at the point when the world is actually ready to take this issue seriously, we international lawyers and other policy people are ready to go. Thank you.
Sue, thank you very much. Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary Brudvig. So I'm a chemist, and the title of my essay was Reimagining Solar Fuels to Power the Planet with Sustainable Energy. So as you know, we're burning fossil fuels that provide most of our energy and creating carbon emissions. We need to transition to a carbon neutral economy. So how can we do this? Where will our sources of energy come from? Most estimates it will be from wind and solar energy. We have good technologies, as John Kerry just said, for photovoltaics to make electricity and wind turbines to make electricity. The problem is electricity is instantaneous, and wind and solar are intermittent. So how do we transition to use wind and solar to provide all our energy? The issue is storage. We need to come up with good ways to store solar electricity or wind electricity. Do you know what the main way that we store electricity right now is? Pumping water uphill. Yeah. And that takes a lot of land. It's not particularly sophisticated. So I take inspiration from biology. Biology stores the solar energy in the form of chemical bonds. And all of our fossil fuels came from this process. They have huge advantages because chemical bonds, or the chemicals that are produced in photosynthesis, can be stable for indefinitely, for millions or even billions of years in the process of photosynthesis that has produced our fossil fuels. And so how can we transition to this? Well, we'd like to be able to develop the technology to make chemical bonds with solar electricity or wind electricity. And we could solve the storage problem. This is really a critical issue right now. In Southern California, the price of electricity goes negative every day at noon because there's too much electricity and there isn't a good technology to store it and not pumping water uphill. If we had a technology that could use the electrical potential or direct sunlight to create chemical fuels, we could store them. And one possibility would be, for example, water splitting to make hydrogen as a fuel. I'm not advocating a hydrogen economy in my chapter. I would like to see a technology where we could make liquid fuels. That would provide the ability to store energy, but also would allow us to use our existing infrastructure for liquid fuel as transportation fuels for distribution, but it would be a carbon neutral economy. And this is my vision for the future. So there's a number of advantages for this, as I mentioned, but what are the challenges? Well, we don't have this technology right now. And so we need to develop the research. There has to be a sustained support for research to be able to do this. The other issue is that the price of fossil fuels are really cheap right now, and economically we don't have a competitive advantage to be able to introduce these alternative technologies. So this is a policy issue too. I'm not a policy person. The others on the panel can address that point. But I think to achieve this vision that we could power our planet completely with wind and solar energy requires the research to develop the technology, which should be sustained and ongoing so that we can introduce it, and the policies to make it economic so that we can actually not be at an economic disadvantage to develop sustainable renewable energy. So that's my chapter, and my vision for the future is using solar and wind energy to create chemical bonds and solar fuels to power our planet.
Thank you. Gary, thank you very much. We'll turn now to Ken Gillingham, who is my colleague at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. He's an energy economist.
Yes, hi. So my chapter is about fostering energy innovation. So it's a topic close to the previous topic, but on a much finer policy level. And really I'm looking for a ready-to-go proposal in many respects. I'm an economist, so I start by thinking, what are the market failures that help motivate policy? And there's some very clear market failures in clean energy innovation. Besides the obvious climate and local air pollution ones, there are also spillovers in research and development from early stage technologies. And these intersect in such a way that the lowest cost long run approach to addressing issues such as climate change, real externalities, may actually not be the lowest cost short run approach because it requires a lot of investment up front. And there also may be coordination failures. So these people think of as chicken and egg problems or network externalities, as economists put them. And you could think of this as when you have electric vehicles, if you have multiple different charging platforms for electric vehicles rather than a single charging platform. That would be one coordination failure. These market failures led me to think hard about what are some of the issues that are going to come about as we move to a cleaner technology, a cleaner grid, and a cleaner overall economy. When I was working for the White House, I was doing some analysis at one point on the Recovery Act and looking into the Tiger grants that are transportation grants. There were some key features to the Tiger grants that I found quite intriguing that may have some relevance today. Obviously, at the time, they were for shovel-ready projects, but they were for desirable long-run outcomes. And they were awarded on a competitive basis. The applicants were expected, and not all of them perhaps met this threshold, but expected to focus on innovative projects that fit in with a larger long-run transportation plan, ideally with multiple modes of transportation. So not just building new bridges, but thinking about transportation from a more holistic perspective. The Tiger grants were actually widely popular. They were bipartisan. There's been substantial support for them, and they've followed on. There was originally $1.5 billion in the first year, and then since then there has been about $500 million, and there's a new version of the BUILD program, a new version of the grants today, which is maybe focusing a little less on the innovation, but the grants have remained. So thinking about this from a perspective of clean energy innovation, can we apply the Tiger model to clean energy innovation? Now, the question here is, what are the ways that it would be best applied? So there are key principles, first of all. You'd want them to be competitively awarded grants. You'd want them to be innovative, so new ideas that really are essential, and ideas that provide long-term benefits. What I'm focused on in my chapter is areas where a modest amount of funding could go quite a long ways, with the idea that these can help unleash the market. So there are a whole bunch of different ideas I have in my chapter for areas that often involve coordination. So as simple as coordinating between states, but as well things along planning out new transmission lines in areas where you're going to have lots of huge numbers of renewables hopefully coming on. Thinking more carefully about new technologies that allow for a smarter grid, so developing new technologies that allow substations to work in two directions, and if you have lots of distributed energy, it can be sent back. Thinking carefully about how can electric buses potentially have an infrastructure that allows them to recharge as they're moving along, so that in New York City, for example, when you have buses go by, they can actually recharge and you can have electric buses. These types of investments in infrastructure and coordination that may not have been done. The key aspect is they would very likely not have been done or not been fully coordinated. So coordinated standards as well for new clean energy technologies. This is an area that I feel is a very important and exciting area, but often gets very little attention. It's not a substitute for carbon pricing, for other early stage investment, but it's a complement. And that's kind of the key element to this plan is complementing other strategies to make sure that we have the connective tissue that allows for the clean energy transition to occur in a low cost and rapid way, as rapid as is needed.
Ken, thank you very much. So let me introduce Tony Leiserowitz, another colleague from the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And Tony, as a number of you may know, is the director of the Yale program on climate change communications and is heard on the radio, if not every day, almost every day. Tony.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to stand up because I think better standing. I want to pick up from where Secretary Kerry left off. My essay in this book was called Building Public and Political Will for Climate Action. And I have to say, this essay was written over a year ago, and it feels more relevant today than when I wrote it. We just saw the largest mass global protest demanding action in world history, 2 days ago. And and we may see it again this Friday because there's going to be another one. Okay? So what I try to lay out is a strategy for how do we build the public demand, and that's what I really mean by public will, for the action that has to be taken by our political leaders, for the structural, for the systemic change that we know is all critically needed. Public will can be expressed in lots of different ways, but the one way I'm going to focus on here is citizen activism. Okay? Citizens basically demanding that the political system act. And one of the ways that we come at this is through our research, and I'm going to use the United States specifically, is that in our work and I do national scale studies looking at how Americans respond to this issue, and one of the things that we've learned is that Americans don't have a single viewpoint on climate change. And too often people say, okay, there's believers and there's deniers, and that's too simplistic and it does real violence to the truth. In fact, what we've identified is 6 distinct Americas in the United States that each come at this issue from a different vantage point. And very quickly, the first group, and I'll come back to them, is the alarmed. That's 29% of Americans who are firmly convinced it's happening, human-caused, urgent, and they strongly want to get involved personally to demand action. A second group that we call the concerned, 28%, think it's happening, human-caused, and serious, but think that the impacts are still distant in time and space, so don't yet see why it's urgent. Then a group we call the cautious, about 17%, who are still on the fence. Is it real? Is it not? Is it human? Is it natural? Kind of making up their mind. A small but important group we call the disengaged, 5%, who say, I don't even know what global warming is, believe it or not. Then a group that we call the doubtful, who is, that's 9%, who are like, I don't think it's real, but if it is, it's natural cycles, nothing we have anything to do with it, nothing we can do anything about. And then last but not least, a group we titled the dismissive, also just 9%, but who are firmly convinced this is not happening, it's not human caused, it's not an urgent problem, and most of whom who literally tell us that they're conspiracy theorists. Okay? It's a hoax, it's scientists making up data, etc. Now, I have 4 proposals in this chapter. One, I think we need to organize the alarmed. They are a latent potential social movement. The alarmed are 29% of the country. That's 71 million Americans. Okay? And you know what an issue public is a political science term. Think of the pro-choice or anti-abortion movement, the pro or anti-immigration movement, the pro-gun control, or the NRA. In fact, the NRA is a really nice case in point. It's not enough to have overall public opinion behind you. You need an issue public, a small set of citizens who are passionate about an issue, who are willing to put themselves out on the front lines and say, you will take action on my issue. Okay. Now, the NRA is an interesting one because they've clearly been able to be very effective. How many people are in the NRA? 4 million. In a population of over 300 million. They punch way above their weight. Why? Because they're organized. The alarmed are 71 million, and 21 million of them say that they would personally, definitely join a campaign to convince elected officials to act. They outnumber NRA members 5 to 1. But they're not organized. And by the way, 8 million of them say that they would personally engage in civil disobedience to demand climate action. But secondly, you can't just have that issue public, you also have the silent permission of the other 60% of Americans who are in the middle. If you're an elected official, you have to get elected by a majority. And these are people who are never going to march in the streets, they're never going to donate money, they're never going to call their members of Congress, but what you want from them is their silent permission, that they won't punish politicians for leading. And a little bit more ambitious, you want them to say, you know what, I'm going to prefer candidate A over candidate B because this one's more active on climate. And that's it. That's all you want from them. The third major strategy, however, is that you need to build that original issue public to be as diverse as everybody in that 60%. Because far too many Americans right now think that climate change is an issue being discussed and led by scientists, environmentalists, or some liberal politicians. And if I don't identify with any one of those groups, then it doesn't really feel like my issue. It's their issue. And what we need is to get it from their issue to our issue to ultimately to my issue. So the last thing I'll just say about this is that I think in many ways I take inspiration from climate change itself, because we know as we warm the world that we get more and more frequent and intense extreme events, right? That's one of the major outcomes of climate change. But on a positive side, if we can shift the political, social, and cultural climate of climate change, we will win more frequently, those wins will go farther, and they will be more durable. Because this is an issue that's going to take the next generation to accomplish. 2050 is 30 years. We don't solve this in the next year. We don't solve this in the next 12 years. This is a long-term, sustained struggle. Are we building the political power that will sustain us through that entire time period? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Our fifth and final panelist is Monica Medina. She has been in the government back and forth several times with service at our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But today is, in fact, the founder and publisher of a new online environmental news service called Our Daily Planet. Monica, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dan. And I just want to say it's a tough act to follow, these incredible people. And I'm proud to be the diversity on this panel because I went to Columbia, not Yale. And I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank you, Dan. I want to thank everyone at Yale for even inviting me to be a part of this publication. I feel honored and to be able to talk to Representative Castor, who's leading our government, and former Administrator Riley, who paved the way. It's such an honor to be able to talk to you about my big idea. And it came from my time in the government that Dan referenced. I am also a member of the Sue fan club. I worked at NOAA, and we often supported Sue's work in the State Department, trying to make sure our negotiators had the most up-to-date weather and climate data so that they could well represent us there. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how our weather forecasts are now being tested and stretched more than ever before. Our National Weather Service, which is a government agency, as you all know, delivers 5,000 forecasts a year. And most are routine, but a few are critical to saving lives and property. And I'll take a minute. I hadn't really planned to talk about this, and when I wrote the chapter, it hadn't happened. But President Trump actually, I think, helped us all to have a new appreciation for the National Weather Service when he took out that Sharpie and drew on that map. And I was actually watching on television when it broke and started to tweet. And it was amazing to me. I'd never had a viral tweet before that. And it was amazing what happened when I said, this is unprecedented. And he's crossed a line in terms of putting the public at risk, because by changing that map, he threw into confusion what was the actual forecast. And to me, it really is the essence of why I wrote this chapter and what my, quote unquote, my idea is. Because every time in the past when we've had weather challenges, we've had to expand our forecasting capabilities. And that's how we went from being a National Weather Bureau to the National Weather Service. And it seemed to me that it's time for us to expand our capabilities again, given the challenges that we're up against with climate. So my big idea is, or my chapter is called Bracing for Impact, and my big idea is a practical one, that we need to transform our National Weather Service into a National Weather and Climate Service in order to prepare for the impacts of climate that we know we are about to experience. 40% of the public lives in coastal counties, and they're increasingly at risk from storm surge. Cities like Miami and New Orleans, New York, and Newark even will be greatly impacted by climate change, even if we manage to stay within 2 degrees, or if not, if we go beyond that. So weather events, as you all know, and Tony's talked about, are becoming more severe, and we are more and more vulnerable to them as a country. And I'll name a few, just from recent times. There were 6 tropical storms brewing at once last week that tied the record. There were 5 Category 5 hurricanes in the last 3 years. There have only been 35 in 100 years, and so we see them increasing. August tied for the hottest August globally since 1880. And you see the impacts of that when 59 people in a country like Japan die from heat stroke in the month of August. Hurricane Dorian, we all know the horror of Hurricane Dorian and what it did to the Bahamas, but you don't have to think back far to think of Hurricane Michael and what it did to the panhandle of Florida. So what happened in the Bahamas is going to happen to us. It's happened to us in the past. It's happening now. But it's not just storms. It's Paradise, California, and the thousands of climate refugees that the fires created. When I was at NOAA in 2009, we started keeping track of the number of billion-dollar storms, and we didn't think there would be very many, and yet last year there were 14 billion-dollar storms in the US, and I suspect that number will go higher and higher, and the amount of damage from each of those storms is getting to be a higher and higher amount. So my idea is, well, let me take one step back and say one more thing, which is we are a weather-ready nation. I don't want people to think that our weather forecasters are not working around the clock, that we don't have the capacity to forecast weather every day. We do. We do warnings and watches, and that's a critical government function. And I think back to just watching Twitter and seeing how quickly news is spreading on Twitter today. It's a great public-private partnership. We need to do the same thing for climate services, climate forecasting. We need to take what we do in the Weather Service now and think about it in terms of what happens at 10 to 14 to 30 days, and then seasonal forecasts, and then interannual forecasts. We need to use the same basic government capabilities. We need to build them up, create a store of information, of data, put sensors on everything from ships to airplanes to cars, try and gather more data so that we can make better, more durable, more useful forecasts for the kinds of climate impacts that we're going to see, so that when we improve our infrastructure, if we pass a Green New Deal or somehow we improve our energy grid, we will be better prepared to do that by having the kind of information that we don't really have readily available to us right now. So with that, I'll just say one last little plug, which is to read our Daily Planet, which is my publication, because we're trying to do just what Tony talked about, which is bring this kind of information to people every day. It's easy to subscribe. We were a co-sponsor of the Climate Forum last week. We had 12 bipartisan presidential candidates come and talk about their climate plans. So I am fully subscribed to what Tony is preaching, and hopefully you'll all read us and help share the publication, spread the word.
Monica, thank you very much. So some themes are starting to emerge, and I thank our panelists for having put their ideas forward and to present them here today. And I wonder if any of you have anything you want to say in reaction to what you've heard from any of the others.
Can I just put in a plug for another chapter?
Please.
So one of the other chapters was written by my former boss at NOAA, Jane Lubchenco, who wrote a wonderful chapter about oceans. And her idea was to save oceans by creating more marine protected areas and better managing fisheries. And so I want to plug that one because it's excellent, and I know of her expertise, and I think it's another dimension of this challenge, another great idea. So.
Well, it's a joy. Thank you for that. And it's a joy to have solutions across so many of the sustainability issues that we face, that we can bring forward a significant perspective on climate change. And by the way, there are 4 or 5 more climate change-related chapters that are in this book beyond the ones represented here. So we really are pushing forward on lots of fronts, and it's a joy to be part of a solutions-oriented effort. So I thank you all again. I do want to turn in just a minute to all of you in the audience. We are focused on a conversation, on a dialogue. We've got mic runners ready to go, so if you want to ask a question, please do raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. But we also have with us today one of the leaders in the Congress on the issue of climate change. And I just want to invite Representative Kathy Castor, who is the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, to say a word.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Kathy Castor. I represent the Tampa Bay area in the state of Florida, where we did set a record, an unfortunate record this summer. Just a few weeks ago, for the first time ever, we did not fall below 82 degrees at night for 3 days in a row. It's quite warm. Elizabeth, it's great to see you. I feel like all of you are answering the call to action. You may not be aware that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, at the outset of this new Congress, when the Democrats took the majority, she reestablished a climate committee. It's called the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. 10 years ago, it was led by Ed Markey, who then it was titled the Select Committee on Global Warming and Energy Independence. So you can see, just as Secretary Kerry said, we've lost ground. We are in a full-blown crisis, and we have to address it with bold, creative action. This is fantastic, Dan, and to all of you, because right now the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis has a request for information out, and we are soliciting ideas from all across the country, all across the world, from academic institutions, the private sector, all of you, for the climate solutions that we need to put into place. The charge of the Select Committee now is to develop our climate action plan, the details of the Green New Deal, and to present that to the Congress and to the country by March of next year, and then turn it into legislation that a new president can then take off the shelf, and we will be ready to go. We're doing a lot in the interim as well, because we simply don't have time to wait. But thank you for your work, for your attention to this. I'm inspired by the youth climate activists. We had Greta Thunberg in the committee last week. She said, follow the science. And what I took away from that is that we truly have a moral obligation to our kids and our grandkids and the next generations to tackle the climate crisis. So this is an important step. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Representative Castor. And the floor is open. We're interested in thoughts, crisply formed, questions, sharply and pointedly asked. And we will happily have you directed to any one of our speakers, or two if you'd like. But we'd like to move the conversation around. So we're going to keep people to tight, focused questions. All right. We've got a lot of hands up. Our mic runners have got the microphone. Please, by the way, tell us who you are and an affiliation, if that would be helpful.
Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Cool. Rachel Peterson, I'm with the McGovern Foundation. Many of you touched on, I believe Kenneth and Gary, you touched on some of the resource constraints that are preventing the implementation and scale of your big ideas. So I'm wondering, where can the philanthropic community have the biggest impact? And if you suddenly found yourself in charge of millions of dollars, where would you put it and why?
Want to answer that?
That's for me, okay.
Yes. No, Indy, go.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of things that need to be done, to put only one, I think, my view on technology is that we should be funding all the possibilities right now, because to pick a winner at the beginning is a bad strategy. You know, in the end, it may not be what you think it is going to be right now. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket.
That's a very good answer, although I think one of the themes you saw is that innovation broadly is critical. And innovation has various places it can play out. Ken has identified a way to help drive that through government. But I think historically, at least, universities in particular have played a critical role in basic science and the kind of breakthroughs on which we might build over time. So do you want to say anything about? All right, on we go. Where is our microphone next? We'll start here. Thanks.
My name is Sten Vermund. I work at Yale University. When James Brady was shot along with President Reagan, I joined the Brady campaign because I thought something should be done for guns. And when Gabby Gifford was shot, I joined the Gifford organization. And then I decided to look it up, and there were 19 others. Well, I decided to look up how many climate change organizations there were, and Tony has commented there are 121 that are listed in convenient locations. Anybody can look it up. And so we're sort of organized. Would you comment on why the NRA is this consolidated body, the anti-NRA is 21 bodies, and we are 121 bodies?
Wow, great question. So there's a lot of things going on there, but a couple key things. My fourth point, which I didn't get to, so thank you very much for is that it's not enough to be organized in all these different communities within the climate community. So let me just take a moment to say, I call climate change the policy problem from hell because you almost couldn't design a worse fit for our psychology or our institutions. Except that this is so fundamental, this is so all-encompassing, that every human being on this planet has a direct and real stake in the outcome of this one. And one of the things that's so exciting in this movement is all the new voices that are coming to the fore, okay? Religious voices, military voices, businesses, doctors and nurses, on and on, that are beginning to speak up and say, you know what, this is our issue too. This isn't just about polar bears. And so we're beginning to see the formation of more and more of those groups, and there's more than 121 out there. However, two things. Most of those groups are not organized around developing and exerting political power. Most of them have been very much oriented to policy research and development, lobbying, making rational economic arguments in the halls of Congress, and so on. And that's all crucial work, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely vital work. But it's not accompanied by a demand from constituents, from consumers, from the public for those things. So one is we need more groups that actually develop power. And the second is that they need to be coordinated. It's like a massive cat herding problem, right? This community almost has like just a problem getting together and actually rowing in the same direction. Whereas our opponents tend to be highly coordinated, okay? And I like to say it's the difference between an incandescent light bulb and a laser. Same amount of energy, completely different results, and in this case, we're the dim bulbs, because our energy is going every which direction. Okay, and sometimes even contradictory. Whereas if you look at, and I'll name them, the Koch network, wow, I have so much respect for what they built for generations, for more than a generation. They built it, it's powerful, it's organized, it's well-funded, and when they lose, and they have lost lots of times, do they give up and take their toys and go home? No, they double down. They say, what happened? What did we do wrong? Let's go back at it, and we're going to put even more resources into accomplishing our long-term goal. Our community, the climate community organized around 2008 with this big project called Design to Win, and when it didn't work, when we just barely lost, all the foundations, back to the question before in particular, said, well, that didn't work. Let's take our money and go our own separate ways again. Okay? We get creamed. So that's my response.
There was a question in the back. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ornella Baigamba, and I'm a current undergrad at Yale College. And I actually had the pleasure of taking Professor Esty's class my first semester, and it shaped a lot of my path at Yale, so thank you for that. But I'm actually really here representing, or as Rwanda's youth representative for the Climate Action Summit, and I actually wanted to ask almost all of you, it really is a general question, is a lot of the science and innovation that we see is still very much so centered in the global north. And if we do want to increase the stake that everyone else in the world feels and improve the innovation that occurs so that it can be for everyone and mainly help empower those rural communities. Sorry, this is kind of getting confusing, but what I'm trying to say is, how do we build that research and technology infrastructure in the global south so that people are able to create solutions for themselves in those areas and not just have to kind of rely on innovation happening on another part of the world? Thank you.
You know, I think my topic is solar fuels, and I think this is something that you could apply on a local scale. You know, for example, a rooftop photovoltaic, and this allows rural environments to be able to empower themselves as opposed to a huge grid that requires much more massive investment. So I think this is a technology that potentially could address this point.
Anyone else want to offer an answer to that? But I think the bottom line.
No. Yeah,
Go,
I
Ken.
mean, I think it's critical to build connections, and I think that there's a dearth of those connections right now. Yale's actually doing something with Rwanda. I don't know if people have seen this, to try and build some of exactly these connections with Rwanda. Now, that's one country, but this, in order to solve climate change, this has to be done with many, many different countries in many different places. And in many respects, it does require resources, getting back to resources. And this is an area, actually, where I think there is real value in putting some resources to extend what we're learning. There is innovation going on in the developed world that doesn't always immediately translate into the developing world, but with some thought, we might be able to find ways to help that leapfrogging that we'd love to see happen as much as possible.
I would also just add that you're quite right. We can't afford, with a problem this big, to leave it to some subset of the society to pursue the solutions. So we need to bring to bear all the brain power we can from across the world. My own personal big idea on this, perhaps not yet fully developed, would be to take advantage of the excess supply of doctoral students that are coming out of programs in the research universities of the United States and find a billionaire who will support them going to the developing world on 10-year contracts to help build the infrastructure in a big way. So that we would find every one of us who teaches and has doctoral students finds a number of them who cannot find teaching jobs in America. They would love to have a teaching job in any one of the developing countries and have a chance to launch into the career they care about. So if any of you have a spare billionaire who can drop $1 billion or so into this, I think we could transform higher education across the world and engage the next generation globally in a whole set of solutions, climate change among them. All right, another question. I think we had another one on the back side here. Do we have a mic there?
Thank you very much. This was terrific. I'm Mary Evelyn Tucker, teaching at the School of Forestry. I just wanted to mention, as the Congresswoman from Florida said, this is a moral issue. And it was very significant when Dan Esty came back from the COP meeting in Paris, and we had a panel at the Kroon Hall, Burke Hall, and Dan held up the papal encyclical of Pope Francis and said, this is why we got an agreement in Paris. And I just want to put into the discussion here, as I think many of you are sympathetic to, that the religious communities, the ethical force that's coming on board in huge ways needs to be a major part of this discussion, because that's the diversity that you've also signaled that's needed, as Tony and others have said. So the question is simply, how do we do this? Because the science and policy have driven the action and law, but how do we really engage religious communities who can make a difference on these issues? 85% of the world's people say they're religious. In the divestment movement, that's now $11 trillion, 27% is from religious communities. There's a force here of institutional power, of educational understanding, and even of financial commitment in socially responsible investment. So, love to have your response.
Anyone want to take that up?
Well, I'll take it. So, of course, Mary Evelyn, great to see you, and I totally agree with you. I mean, to oversimplify, organize. That's it. We just got to organize. And that's, unfortunately, one of the great things that's actually happening within the religious community. As you know, you help bring this into being. Each of the world's major religions have come together, separately and come together to say that climate change is a core challenge for our faith. And what can we draw on in terms of our religious texts, in terms of our precepts, our practices? How should we act as human beings that happen to believe in the divine? How should we act in this new and incredibly difficult and challenging world? And the great thing is that That conversation is happening in every corner of the world, and it's increasingly starting to organize. And I'll just pull out one organization, and that's Green Faith. They have hundreds and hundreds of leaders from around the world, religious leaders, coming together and actually beginning to design joint campaigns. They were one of the sponsors of the mass protests that we just saw a couple days ago. So I think there's tremendous potential that is just on the verge of really starting to be unlocked in that community. So more, please.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Jim Huffman. I'm at Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland. I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to read the whole book, but if the indexers did a good job, there's only 2 mentions of nuclear power in this book, one with reference to the Fukushima disaster and another recommending, I think correctly, that we not decommission existing nuclear power plants. But it seems to me when you have a source of power that is carbon-free, the technology is already developed and improving very rapidly. Why isn't it part of the conversation? And it's not just true here, it's true in all conversations about climate change. Why isn't it not a central part of the conversation?
Yeah, well, I think my chapter was one of the ones that mentioned nuclear energy. I'm a big advocate of nuclear energy personally because it is, as you rightly point out, it's carbon-free, and we do have the technology to scale it up. But it's really an issue of the concern of risk of nuclear energy, and I think this is something we have to address if we're going to really scale up nuclear energy. And Fukushima and other nuclear disasters have just really made this a toxic issue right now.
Ken, do you want to add anything?
I mean, the other aspect to it is, at least in recent years, we've seen a lot of cost overruns. The economics of, at least in the United States, of building nuclear reactors has not looked very, very good. Now, that doesn't say that TerraPower and other future generations of nuclear technology couldn't lead us down a path that has safer and less expensive nuclear technology. But it's harder to justify nuclear technology, with the exception of keeping plants that are currently existing around longer, when the attempts to build new plants turn out to have such cost overruns.
Thank you. Right here.
Hi, Matty Stanislaus, Director of the Global Battery Alliance, and used to work with an agency formerly known as EPA. So we just released a report on Friday, which calls out 30% reduction of greenhouse gases between the energy and transportation sector. Could also deliver energy for communities without electricity in Africa. One of the key recommendations is utility policy. Right? In the U.S., utility policy is controlled by states and multi-state power pools. So it seems to me one of the key things that we need to focus in on is utility policy to enable battery-enabled, dispatchable, renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment on that? Probably have a lot of people agree.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually have said many times and said to my students that looking back on my 3 years running Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, the thing I regret most that I didn't get done was reimagining the utility business model and then building the Public Utility Commission structure of rules and regulations that would transform that business model. So I think you're quite right, and we probably do need to get onto that as a matter of priority. Back on the side here.
Michael Corin, I'm an FES grad and a reporter at Quartz. So I think a lot of you mentioned scientific, social, technological issues. One of the things that didn't come up explicitly was economics. And I think there was an economist who said, I don't want to be president as long as I can write the economics textbooks. And I think that's very true. Is there a concerted effort, or potentially one, that changes the discount rate? Essentially, this is a problem. We don't value the future enough. And we make cost-benefit decisions that don't reflect that. Is there potential, either at the state or the national level, or some other level of government that I'm not aware of, that can actually maybe not be so public, but have really deep and profound changes in how we make decisions on what we invest in and what we don't?
Ken, I hate to say this, but as the resident economist here on the panel, I'm afraid this one goes your way.
This one certainly goes my way. The discount rate is a large and complicated topic. I'm not going to be able to summarize this in a short time, but happy to talk to you afterwards. But briefly, there have been efforts within the economics community to bring in considerations of intergenerational equity as well as within generation equity into how we think about the discount rate. One of the challenges with doing all of this is that we have rates of return, and we have a long-standing consensus in economics that you use standard rates of return as a metric. So it's a slow process that is occurring, but I actually do see movement towards using, for intergenerational problems like climate change, lower long-run discount rates. And I think that within 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of become standard at the state and federal level.
Thank you.
Dan, thanks very much. Tom McHenry from Vermont Law School. It'll seem like a setup question, but what would the panel tell us in terms of the skills that we need to be educating young people about to address these problems? I'd be interested in those, talking about those skills a little bit.
Seems like a softball, but our panel is fumbling to mix metaphors.
I mean, look, there's a lot of skills that, and this is a question we wrestle with at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies all the time, right? We're getting in, and really, I guess I would come down to one key word, and it's leadership. Okay, if there's one thing I hope our students come out with is how to be leaders for the environment, no matter which field they end up in. Because that's the great thing about our students is that they go on to be leaders in government, in business, in the advocacy community, and so on. They're remarkable where our students end up. But are we training them to be full leaders and all the dimensions that have to go into that? There is no just, it's not enough to be a content knowledge. You have to be able to, for instance, from my perspective, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to persuade. You have to be able to engage. You have to be able to market your products, et cetera. And that's a skill that we are now trying to build out into our student body, is to actually provide that as a set of core curriculum that you can engage. All of these analytical capacities of law and economics and the humanities and so on, I think are also critical in helping produce well-rounded interdisciplinary leaders that can handle making decisions in an incredibly complex world that they're going into. So anyway, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's leadership.
Yes, where the microphone is in the back.
Thank you. I'm Alex Munoz. I'm a Yale World Fellow, and I work for National Geographic Society on a project called Pristine Seas. This is hi, Monica. How are you? This is a question for Sue, and maybe you, Dan, can jump in. I'm from Chile, and we are hosting the COP25 in December. And I wanted to ask you what success would look like, considering that things are not shaping the best way. The U.S. is withdrawing. We've discussed this, and there doesn't seem to be an agreement on many things. So, with all those factors in place, what do you think would be like the one thing that could be good and meaningful to take out of that meeting in December?
Well, I probably mentioned three things rather than one thing, right? So 2020 is supposed to be the year when parties are not required, but they're encouraged to update their nationally determined contributions. So if you think of the Secretary General Summit this week as maybe like step one, you've got the Conference of the Parties in Chile, maybe step two, and then 2020 is step three. So I would think you'd want some kind of signal from some either number of countries or countries with a lot of emissions that goes beyond what we're going to hear tomorrow or this week. So that would be sort of one form of success, is sort of commit to commit or actual announcement of enhancing national contributions. That's one. Second is what the so-called work program under the Paris Agreement was almost done last year, but there's a piece that's missing, and that's all about market mechanisms under the Paris Agreement, and that's sort of the main negotiating piece to be finished. So that would be another kind of criterion for success. And the third is that Chile, your own country, has announced that this COP should focus on the ocean, and they're calling it the Blue COP, right? And the idea is that the ocean has been valued, I guess, in the Paris Agreement, UNFCCC context. The ocean plays such a huge role in terms of absorbing warming, it's being affected, it's a kind of a victim of climate change, but it's also a possible source of help in terms of mitigation because of blue carbon, et cetera. But those things have not been discussed too much, and so Chile's trying to highlight that issue by having some high-level meetings on it, by discussing the IPCC report on the oceans that's coming out this Wednesday, and possibly also by sort of formally institutionalizing the ocean issue under the Paris Agreement. So I would keep an eye on those three elements.
Got a question here.
Hi, I'm Rodney Irwin from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in Geneva, Switzerland. And obviously with the organization I work for, I'm curious as to how these big ideas will translate for business. So what do you think we need to do to motivate not only the political leaders that you've been referring to, but the business leaders? When you bear in mind that Tata group of companies has a bigger carbon emission than the country of Austria, they are significant.
I mean, the number one thing they can do is to continue. Businesses do have ears of politicians. They have the ears of many folks. Maybe not. I'm not going to say every single politician, but businesses play an important role in the economy, and they play a really important role in the discourse. And there's been an increasing, including by your own group, effort by businesses to make it clear that climate change is real and important to them and make real efforts themselves. I think that this changes the overall discourse in a way that makes it clear that there is underlying support for climate action and potentially allows governments to get closer to making action or making actual action themselves. Tony, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, is that, look, businesses have immense influence in our society, and one of the ways that citizens can influence political decision makers is a bank shot. You can directly pressure your elected officials, you can pressure a company that will then put pressure on those officials, and that can be a highly effective strategy in today's world. We've seen many examples of where customers have basically gotten their businesses to put pressure on elected leaders to change legislation. That's a powerful thing. And what we see, at least in the US, as of right now, more Americans are willing to vote with their pocketbook on the issue than to vote at the ballot box. So that's changing. So I think it's actually an incredibly powerful lever of change.
Monica.
And I would just say that the products that a climate service could provide are essential to businesses being able to adapt and be more effective in the face of the same shocks, the climate shocks that we see now. And it's a demand for those sorts of basic products that then businesses both can turn into more sophisticated products. It's a potential creator of businesses, but it's also a way for businesses to save money. And, you know, insurers, real estate, manufacturing, transportation, all of the businesses rely on the kind of information that we get really well for 0 to 10 days. But beyond that, it's pretty tough. And there are a lot of businesses that could use this kind of forecasting. The one I'm thinking of is ski resorts, who we are now able, through some research that's going on, to be better able to predict snowpack in places like the Rocky Mountains. We could do that more, and those resorts could be prepared for the warmer winter or the colder winter, have more water on hand to make snow. When would they be able to make snow? That's just one tiny example, but you think about that multiplied by 1 million different businesses. And I'll tell you, when the president did the Sharpie, I got a lot of emails from people far and wide who said, I rely on that forecast every single day and it has to be right. And so creating those kinds of products that will carry us out beyond the current weather capacity is really essential, I think, to being a successful business in the 21st century.
Well, I'll just add one thought to this, which is I was yesterday part of a group called the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, 1,000+ businesses who've come together to say there should be a price on carbon, and a significant number of them have put an internal price on carbon, and that does help to normalize this as something that we should all expect as part of the climate change policy future. So I hope that momentum continues to build. Now, there's a question here in the middle on the aisle. Yep, coming forward. Actually, you had it on the other side, but that's all right. Let's start on the other side. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Skeen. I'm a joint fellow with Yale Law School and the Natural Resources Defense Council. Oh, sorry. And I suppose my question is for Tony. I very much appreciated what you said about increasing representation and bringing out new voices. But you mentioned that, one thing, the climate crisis is going to be kind of a natural gift because we're going to see more and more natural disasters, more buy-in. But for many people, many communities of color, indigenous communities, these are already happening, and they're not being represented in the environmental movement. So what can we do now, especially when we don't have 50 years, to ensure that their voices are heard?
Great question. We need to be more inclusive, period. And we need to provide the resources to bring those and amplify those voices. So I'll just give one example of how we at least are trying to do that. So one of our programs is a national radio program called Yale Climate Connections. This is a daily 90-second radio program that plays on more than 500 radio stations across the country. And really the core of it is to try to give voice to that diversity that we're talking about. And I mean all diversity. I mean old, young people, men, women, big business, small business, people of color, people who are on the front lines in every which way. To be able to express and tell a national audience, here's how climate change is impacting me now. Not some distant, far away, threat, but here's how it's actually causing harm to me now. But even more importantly are the voices of people from that broad swath of diversity across the country who are rolling up their sleeves and taking action. And there's a deep, deep psychological literature on the power of role modeling, of being able to hear the voices of people who look like you, sound like you, dress like you, share your values, are part of your community, however, your identity, however you define it, who are speaking up and saying, you know what, this isn't just an issue that only environmentalists and scientists and liberal politicians care about. This is an issue that we all care about. How do we move this from their issue to our issue and ultimately to my issue? And so at least one small way that we're trying to do that is to literally amplify those diverse voices as part of that national conversation. That's just an example of what I think we need to do over and over again in all of our institutions.
Thank you, Tony. Monica.
Yeah, that's why, one of the reasons why we started our little publication, Our Daily Planet, to do the same thing, change the conversation about conservation, include more voices. But our goal is actually, yes, to broadcast out. We are trying to reach a lot of college students. We've got a really interesting group of readers who are influencers themselves. And so my goal, or our goal, has been recently to try to get more of this in network news coverage, just more of the conventional news sources that people get their information from. And that's why I was really pleased when we were able to persuade MSNBC to hold this climate forum last week with the 12 presidential candidates, and it's bipartisan. So if we can try, by telling these stories, to influence the really big megaphones and get some of those stories on those bigger megaphones, those big screens, the big loud voices, I think will really help to get beyond just our own bubble, which I worry that we're still sort of stuck in our own bubble.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elliot Roseman with the United States Energy Association. A lot of great discussion about how we mitigate and can mitigate climate change, go from a 4 or 4.5 degree world that we heard Secretary Kerry talking about to hopefully more of a 2 degree world. I'd like to hear the panel talk more about adaptation. You were starting to talk about it, Ms. Medina, with regard to the number of billion-dollar storms. Ken, you addressed it a little bit when you were talking about long-run versus short-term and externalities. How do we go about prioritizing what types of adaptations we should do? Should it be zoning? Should it be hardening substations? Should it be dealing with the issues in Rwanda? Is there some kind of metric or way we can go about prioritizing our adaptation efforts?
Monica, do you want to add to your...
Yeah, I'll start with just by saying, that I think, it's hard to adapt if you don't know what you're trying to adapt to and you're not sort of all in the same, going from the same information. That's one of the things that makes weather forecasts so good, is that everyone goes from the same weather forecast. It's not to say that we could get to a perfect set of information, but NOAA has little products now, but they're just sort of helpers. They're helpful. The maps, the flood maps, are another way that we use to decide what to adapt, but that's just one thing. What if we had much more information, we created much more dynamic products that we could use to really make those adaptation decisions? Like NOAA has this climate center that, has advised the city of Miami, but it's not definitive, right? It doesn't have the power of that government imprimatur. This is what the information is. This is the best we have right now, but this is the information. Start to take actions based on that and incentivize them through programs like flood insurance, but more, building codes, energy efficiency, water efficiency, all those things that we really need to be thinking about. Where do we have to have these things now? But without real products and without as much data as we could have going towards more private sector amplifications of those products, I think it's hard. I think it's really hard. There's just a lot of confusion about what should we be doing next. And we do need, I think, a government that is engaged and has a climate or an adaptation czar, somebody who's really in charge of this effort. We asked that. A lot of the candidates got asked that, and some people said it should be me. And I thought, well, yeah, the president needs to be engaged, but maybe that's not the right person. Maybe you need someone much more closely, who's able to do it every day, all day. Get the agencies to coordinate, because it will take kind of a cross-government, cross-economy effort to be that efficient, to get to the right answers. Because we do need to adapt, and no matter what happens, we will be in a world where we're going to be experiencing these impacts. And that's what motivated me to write this chapter. I'm not a weather person, I'm not a scientist, but looking out and thinking about what we need, this is one of the things we need.
Hi, Trey Menville representing MasterCard, and you guys talked a little bit about the business impact tonight. You talked about people voting with their pocketbooks. I think, Dan, you touched on the idea of internal carbon pricing and implementation of those kinds of let's say taxes or fees. But one of the things that we're noticing in our environmental sustainability efforts is a emphasis on transparency, or cooperating with organizations such as the CDP and the TCFD headed by Bloomberg, those ideas to kind of make large businesses who don't necessarily have an environmental impact or footprint like ski lodges or manufacturing, that they sort of start to publish those things and become more accountable to their own consumers. They have their own brand, and that environmental footprint is available information, readily available information. Is that kind of transparency, is that really a call to action, or is it kind of a delaying impact? I know that internal carbon pricing is definitely a nice action item that comes out of it, but what do you guys think about that transparency that's kind of occurring, that drive? Is that something that's worthwhile, or is that simply a delay of real action?
I think it's a bare minimum. I think you need that transparency to start. There's been a huge trend on shareholder reports that involve actually reporting emissions and reporting changes in emissions and also reporting plans for future emissions. And I think it starts to get more important, and you have more impact when you start getting into the plans for how future emissions are going to be changed. But you have to take stock to start of what emissions look like today before you can implement a internal carbon price and say that it actually does something. So I see that as actually the bare minimum, and increasingly large companies are actually doing this, and I think that's the right trend, but I see it as just the bare minimum, just the start.
I would just add one thing. I think there is a significant interest now in getting a more carefully structured set of reporting frameworks with metrics that are carefully defined and methodologies about how you report under them, so that a whole series of actors, including every citizen thinking about what companies to buy from, but every investor thinking about how their portfolios will look, would know with some degree of confidence who the leaders are and who the laggards are. And right now, reporting unstructured as it is, and frankly, TCFD is a start, but it does not require any specific methodology, is not getting us that degree of comparability. And there is, as a result, sometimes even a risk that the laggards reporting narrowly will look like they're leading when in fact they're far behind. So I think some degree of mandatory reporting around a core set of metrics that have methodological underpinnings and are audited to some extent so that the consumer can trust them, the investor can count on them, governments can look at them, would be a good way to go. All right, we are down to our last question, and I think there is one right there, Maggie, to your right. Yeah. No, right in front, a yellow dress, I think. Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Austa Samvician-Clausen. I'm a writer at The Hill and a freelance journalist. And my question is about social media activism and what you guys think about it. So there's so many young people now who want to share their opinions, they want to show their support for sustainability and climate action, and they also want to show their outrage when they see things like the Amazon burning. But I think that it calls into question how helpful it is. Do you guys find it to be helpful when people are sharing on social media, like whether that might be Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, about those things? And how can young people take their social media activism to the next level? Like, how can they be the most helpful?
We have a couple of people who are in the communications arena. Monica, do you want to start?
I say drag your friends to the polls, right? Make sure every single one of them votes. That's why we write what we do. We try to make it clear what the duality of the options. If you don't take action, and that's the basic one, then all the rest of this is just really nice talk.
Tony, a further last thought?
Yeah, look, social media has become a force of its own in our society. It is literally restructuring the way we not just connect and talk to each other, but our politics, our economics, our culture is increasingly evolving right before our eyes on these set of platforms. And there is, you can't just say, is it helpful or not? I mean, it's as complicated as human beings are now, right? I mean, there's so many beautiful things that happen on social media where people find each other who were alone before and are able to find that there's somebody else that understands what they're going through and can empathize and feel their pain and support them through times of need. And there's also the source of just the worst kind of misogyny and white racism and just the most evil parts of the human nature come out in this platform too. So, I mean, is it good or bad? That said, I think, look, you would not have had the climate strike without the power of social media. And that's what we need now, is a global movement. The only way that happens at light speed is that we're connected literally by light speed. And that's what this platform's real greatest promise is, and I think we're beginning to see it actually being used for the organization of mass social change. My last critical point, though, and this is the thing that concerns me about the protests of 2 days ago and upcoming, is that protest is great. Protest drives attention. It's powerful for the people who experience it to know that there are millions of other people who feel as passionately about this as they do. But what comes next? Because September will end. And then it's October, and then it's 2020, and then it's 2025, and so on and so forth. So what I feel like we're still desperately needing is the ability to take people from the experience of social media or from these mass protests and get them into face-to-face, real grassroots organizing. Okay? That's the critical piece. So how do we do that?
Thank you, Tony. Thank you all very much for being here as part of this conversation. I've got a few closing notes, and then you're all invited upstairs to a reception in our rooftop lounge. It really is great to have an incredible turnout here and the back and forth that we've just experienced. It is part of a dialogue that you heard from Dean Burke. We're going to carry forward across the country and around the world in the months ahead. And I do think we're beginning with a focus on solutions and digging into some of the details to lay the foundation for real success when it comes to climate change and to the broader push for a sustainable future. I want to say that it's really a great pleasure to have all of you here. You all are getting a sneak preview copy of this book. If any of you have come from great distances and don't want to carry it home, please leave it at the table on the way out. And in the spirit of a sustainable society, we will reuse and recycle the book and put it in the hands of another thought leader who can be brought into the circle of our conversation. So don't feel you have to take it home if you, in fact, can't get it back to wherever you're going. And by the way, for those who are interested in helping us drive this conversation, dig into the details, I would encourage you not only to take it home and read it, but after you read it, give it to a friend, or better yet, with holidays coming, order 5 copies, and particularly give it to a young person. Help motivate, as you've heard, one of the common themes here is this is a generational issue, and we want to make sure that we've got a next generation of leaders who are engaged in this in substance and in depth, and we do think this will be a reference book. We think there will be lots of opportunities for people to pick it up off the shelf and dig into a topic over time. So let me just close by saying it is a great pleasure to do a project like this, and it's a huge team effort. And I want to thank people who have played a role, all of our essay writers, not just 40, by the way, because some of them are co-authored, 56, ranging in age, you may not know this, from young 20s, several student contributions to this book, to a nearly 80-year-old recent Nobel Prize winner. So we're spanning many generations, and it really is a significant team effort in the writing. But beyond that, we've had an extraordinary group at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, led by Dean Burke, pushing this project forward. Tim Mason, who is here, has played a major role. Thank you very much. Danielle Daly is here. Thank you for your work. Melanie Quigley, also in the back, has worked with Tim to lead this effort. Kristen Floyd has played an important role. And we've had a communications team, Matt Garrett and Kevin Dennehy, who've done just tremendous work to make sure that we're all here and this conversation is moving forward. And beyond that, we have a dozen students, some of whom are here today, others who are not, who've done so much background work and help us get organized for today's event and more broadly. This commitment of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies to lift up these questions, to stay with them, to get into the details, to hear the challenges, and keep pushing to try to really underpin the future of our planet, our response to climate change with the best science, the best data, the best analysis, and frankly with the kind of political understanding that you've heard tonight is going to be necessary to go forward. So thank you all very much who played a role. Please join me in thanking all who participated and our panelists.